Give folks about another 30 seconds or so to join the webinar today. Alrighty, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Connor, and I'm the Deputy Director of Bar Programs and Engagement at the Virginia State Bar, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn program, VSB Governance Explained. The VSB's virtual Lunch and Learn series offers monthly informational webinars featuring topics of interest to members of the bar. We hope you continue to tune in and learn more about the programs and initiatives of the VSB. Today's program will provide a concise overview of how the Virginia State Bar is structured and governed. Now, just a few housekeeping announcements before I turn the program over to our presenter today. This is an informational session and does not offer CLE credit. We encourage you to use the questions feature to submit your questions throughout the presentation. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Cameron Rountree. Cameron joined the Virginia State Bar in 2019 as Deputy Executive Director and was appointed as Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of the VSB in 2022. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Megan. Please let me know if you can't hear me or if there are any other technical problems. Welcome everyone who is attending. Extra credit to those who are not related to me who are attending. Today's St. Patrick's Day, so I hope everyone's able to have an enjoyable and festive day today. So we're going to talk about just some nuts and bolts of how the VSB is governed and how we operate. Won't take long, but I'm happy to field any questions from anyone throughout the course of the webinar. And Megan, as she kindly did, provided me some structure to the conversation, because as much as I enjoy a soliloquy, it is useful to have some framework around the topics we'll cover today. So the first is, what is the VSB and why does governance matter? And of course, the VSB is an administrative agency of the Supreme Court of Virginia. It's one of 4 agencies under the Supreme Court of Virginia, and we have a charge effectively to regulate the profession of law here in the Commonwealth. Why is it important? Well, I think as ethics professors will tell you, and mine certainly did back in law school, is that we learn about the law in different fields and different areas. There's different substantive areas of law, but sometimes lawyers give short shrift to the laws that govern lawyers. And of course, one of the foundational planks of the VSB and what we do pertains to the rules of professional conduct. So if nothing else, all lawyers should have an interest in what the VSB does in the space that governs their professional relationship and their profession, period. With that in mind, who is it that make up the governing bodies of the VSB? And this one is multifaceted. And before I actually get into the authoritative governing bodies, I do want to bring to everyone's attention who the stakeholders are in the VSB, because effectively we have 5. And this is what I've always championed to anyone that is curious about how the VSB operates or who we cater to. And if you think about it at the macro level, all the residents of Virginia are a stakeholder in the VSB. And this is from the perspective of any resident could be in need of a lawyer, and they need to know whether that lawyer who they decide to hire or who may be appointed for them is competent, is not in a suspended status, has a history of discipline or not. Do they maintain their MCLE regulations or their education? So everyone in the Commonwealth who may need a lawyer is a critical stakeholder for the VSB. Similarly, in a mandatory bar state like Virginia, all lawyers are stakeholders. So we have approximately 32,000 active lawyers, about another 13 associate class members. So that's about 45,000 who are engaged in some degree of the law in their day-to-day work. Beyond that, we have a much smaller subset who are volunteer leaders, who become president, who serve on council, who serve on boards, committees, and in sections to help make the profession a robust and admired profession in Virginia and throughout the country. Narrowing down even further, we have the Supreme Court of Virginia. As I mentioned, the VSB is an agency of the Supreme Court, and we have a great relationship with our court and the 7 justices, as well as additional staff at the court within the clerk's office or our sister agencies like the Virginia Board of Bar Examiners. And so we relate and work with the court quite a bit. And then last but not least are the staff members of the VSB. And we have approximately 91 employees who go out on a day-to-day basis and do everything from soup to nuts, investigating cases, to hosting webinars like this, to approving continuing legal education courses, to the whole gambit, communicating, finance, everything. So those are the 5 stakeholders categories that I would bring to everyone's attention. But then for the governance, there are fewer, well, I guess about 4 or 5 you might say as well. And it starts with the General Assembly. The VSB was created in 1938 through an act of the General Assembly. And as we've recently seen, there are a lot of aspects to what we do that still require the legislature's approval. So one of the critical, although less frequent interlocutors with the VSB is the General Assembly. Most importantly, perhaps, is the Supreme Court. As I've said a few times already, we are an administrative agency of the Supreme Court. We carry out the court's rules, the rules of professional conduct, rules pertaining to the unauthorized practice of law. And so the court has a direct oversight role for the VSB. The VSB was created as an agency of the court. And then we start to get into one of those stakeholders I mentioned at the outset, our volunteer leadership. And if you take a look at the rules of court that pertain to the integration of the state bar, you'll see that council is really, the VSB council is really the entity with the authority over the VSB. And so whereas the Supreme Court is a bit separate and oversees the VSB, council is obviously a part of the VSB and the main leadership and volunteer entity that oversees the organization. Below council, or as part of council, is the VSB Executive Committee. The VSB Executive Committee is composed of 13 members, all of whom are members of council, including 4 ex officio section leaders who serve on council and then by extension to the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee reviews everything that council does. It's a smaller group that advises the president and the staff, and in some cases can perform the tasks of council when council cannot convene. So the Executive Committee, a smaller group. And what I failed to mention was that council is actually quite a large group for a governing board. We have 83 members of the VSB council. They represent lawyers from out the Commonwealth through 30 different judicial circuits, are elect members from their circuit, and they serve as members of the volunteer leadership of council. And then the people that are really doing the work for the VSB are the committees, boards, and sections. We have over 23 volunteer entities, as I call them, just collectively, and they're doing the subject matter work in every field. So if you're looking for real property or domestic relations or criminal law or trust and estates or intellectual property, we have a section or a committee that focuses on almost anything you could come up with. So they're the ones out there doing the work. By necessity, the best ideas are going to come from those subject matter experts to the EC and then to council for potential action by the Supreme Court, or in some cases by the General Assembly when it's necessary. So, you know, that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of the governing bodies. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those bodies have enacted or passed or created that actually puts even more parameters around the VSB. So the first is the statutes, right? So as I mentioned, the VSB was created by statute in 1938, And if you're inclined, you can take a look at Virginia Code 54.1. Beginning at in Chapter 39 is the section which pertains to professions, because Title 54 is actually pertains to all professions in Virginia, but Chapter 39 is the section, the chapter that pertains to professions governed by the Supreme Court of Virginia, and it lists attorneys. And if you'll note in 54.13910, you'll see a few items that the General Assembly has authorized the VSB to conduct. And that's investigations and reporting on violations of rules and regulations adopted by the Supreme Court. And we're going to talk about those in a second. It also makes clear that UPL, unauthorized practice of law opinions that are passed by or recommended by the VSB and adopted by the court, that they be incorporated into the Code of Virginia. And then lastly, 54.13910 makes clear that all persons engaged in the practice of law must be active members of the VSB in good standing. There are other provisions of the Code of Virginia that are applicable to what the VSB does. One that we've recently encountered is Section 3912, which pertains to the fee that the Supreme Court may impose on lawyer members of the bar to be members of the VSB. That law has remained static for about 30 years, and just recently the VSB has been engaged in a number of lobbying activities or efforts to increase that threshold to account for the vast amount of time that's elapsed since the code was amended. 3913 pertains to the Client's Protection Fund, how the VSB makes payments to members of the public who've been aggrieved by the wrongdoing of a lawyer. And then lastly, worth pointing out here, of course, there are additional sections, but 54.13914 is the statutory requirement of forfeiture of a license that occurs when someone fails to make successive payments of dues and so forth. Now, I mentioned that 54.13910 makes clear that the VSB has the authority to investigate and report on violations of rules. And the rules of court that pertain to the VSB are found in Part 6, Section 4 of the rules of the Supreme Court of Virginia. I always tell people when I do counsel orientation, it's easy for me to remember it's Part 6, Section 4, because I've lived in Norfolk, Williamsburg, Richmond, and Charlottesville my whole adult life, seemingly, so I can't get away from I-64. So it's always easy for me to remember that. But they're more than just, it's more than just Part 6, Section 4. Section 4 is the section of the rules of court that it addresses the organization and government of the Virginia State Bar. But Part 6 is the integration of the State Bar. And there are 4 sections. I mentioned Part 6, Section 4. The first section is, Section 1 is the unauthorized practice of law section, which lays out rules pertaining to what constitutes practice of law. Section 2 are the Virginia Rules of Professional Conduct. So these are all our ethics rules. They're in Section 2. Section 3 is a little bit anomalous because it's canons of judicial conduct for the state of Virginia. We don't regulate that there's a separate entity, the Judicial Inquiry and Review Commission, that handles that, but that is also included under Part 6 of the rules of court. One thing I would note is that Part 6, is just like any other part of the rules of court. There are Part 2, for example, covers rules of evidence. Part 3 pertains to procedures in civil practice. The rules of the Supreme Court of Virginia that apply to the VSB are the same as any other rules of court that pertain to your practice. Then, besides the statute, the rules of court, we also have bylaws that govern the VSB, and they're split into two parts. We have the first part, which are the bylaws of the VSB, and then Part 2 are the bylaws of the Council of the Virginia State Bar. I won't go into too much detail other than to say for Part 1, it addresses officers of the VSB, defines them. It addresses meetings, the annual meeting, when that shall be held, and how it should be held. Part 2 addresses election to council, how that occurs, how the executive committee is composed. It addresses, creates 5 standing committees that we have: the Legal Ethics Committee, the Committee on Lawyer Discipline, the Professionalism Committee, the Budget and Finance Committee, and then the Access to Legal Services Committee. Those are the 5 standing committees. And it also just addresses what the authority is for certain entities, certain of those volunteer entities that I had mentioned earlier. So those are, again, the governing bodies: General Assembly, Supreme Court, Council, Executive Committee, and then the committees, board sections. And then the governing documents for those are in the Code of Virginia, generally begins at 54.1, Chapter 39, in the various sections. You have Part 6 of the rules of the Supreme Court of Virginia, with Section 2 being the rules of professional conduct, and Section 4 being the organization and governance of the VSB, and then the VSB bylaws for Part 1 and Part 2. So those are the individuals, or the entities rather, that govern the VSB. Those are the documents they look to. How are governance decisions made? Largely, what we try to do is have those decisions made or recommended by the entities that have the most knowledge. So if there's a criminal procedure matter that needs to be recommended for perhaps a rule of professional conduct change, it probably would be best to originate that with the criminal law section. Eventually, if there's going to be a rule of professional conduct change, it's going to shift over to the ethics committee, and then it would route through up to the council to make a recommendation to the Supreme Court as to whether to adopt a particular change on a rule of professional conduct in a criminal context, just to use an example. But the point is to have things originate with those that are best equipped with the knowledge as to the subject, and then have it route up a pyramid more or less to council and then consideration by the Supreme Court. In certain cases, as I mentioned earlier, we have to reach out to the General Assembly, and there's a process for us to do that if there would be some lobbying efforts to change a law. And I think the last topic that I was asked to speak to is, how does one get involved if you're inclined to be more engaged? I always end my columns, for those who read them every month, with the phrase encouraging people to be engaged. And there are a lot of options. As I mentioned, 23 different volunteer entities with committees, boards, and sections. So there are about 5 standing committees, as I mentioned, and a number of other committees. We have a lot of different sections that could be, I guess, attractive based off your practice setting. And then we have a couple of boards. Boards are like the Clients Protection Board, which awards money for those that have been harmed, as I said. We have the Disciplinary Board, which essentially stands in judgment on cases that are brought before it as to allegations of violations of the rules of professional conduct. And so then we have an MCLE board, which approves credit or provides guidance to the staff as to what types of courses should receive credit. So those are some. Almost all positions have a 3-year term with a few noted exceptions. And so when you join, you're generally signing on to take, to participate in a few meetings a year, maybe 4 per year in most sections, or at least with most committees and boards. Could be more with the sections, depending on how engaged each section is. And then, of course, there's the council. You can run for an election. You can put your name in the hat, fill out a petition, and seek to be on the entity with perhaps the most power and influence, according to the rules of court with respect to the VSB. So council, as I mentioned, 83 members, and we only have 3 meetings a year. The executive committee, which is a subset, of course, meets 2 additional times for 5 times a year. But that's not a significant or an overwhelming time commitment if you wanted to go right for the top, so to speak, and serve as a member, an elected member of council. So I think, I would obviously, we encourage everyone to get involved. Things like this lunch and learn are really helpful, we think, to get information out. And it's your bar. Every lawyer in Virginia, you can make the VSB what you would like it to be by your active participation. And I am always reminded, and my heart's warmed by the thoughtful, sincere engagement of so many thousands of lawyers that we have throughout the Commonwealth. People are serious, thoughtful, well-meaning, and always come up with great ideas. Our volunteer leaders, working with a terrific staff, which when we blend those two together, good results can come. And I think we can all be proud of that. So that's all I have for scripted remarks, but happy, Megan, if there are any questions, to field them. But I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Cameron. And I would love to reiterate how much we appreciate our volunteers here at the State Bar. It's one of my favorite things about my job is getting to work with the best of the best of Virginia attorneys. So if the folks on the call, if you have any questions, feel free to drop that in the Q&A. A question for you, Cameron: if a Virginia attorney or even a member of the public wants to learn more about Bar Council or the Executive Committee, may they attend meetings?
Yes, yeah, good question. And yes, all of our meetings are public unless there are a few items that the Virginia Freedom of Information Act allows those subjects to go into a closed session. But otherwise, the overwhelming vast majority are public. I can recall maybe 3 times in 7 years where that wasn't the case, where a portion, not the whole meeting, but a portion was in a closed session. But everything else is public. As a matter of fact, your department and team do a great job laying out at our meetings where members of the public can sit and where the voting members sit, just so that we can know who is in which group at the council meetings with so many council members. But yep, absolutely a public. And if it's a remote or a virtual meeting, that information is posted for the public as well to observe.
Great. And for anyone who doesn't know, the VSB calendar is available. It's in that top navigation bar. I recommend, putting a bookmark on there just to see what the VSB has coming up in terms of public meetings, but also other activities and CLE programs. Cameron, another question for you. Say a VSB member can't attend the meeting, but they still want to stay up to date with what Bar Council is doing and discussing and voting on. Where can they find that kind of information? Yep,
another good question. Karen Persinger, our communications director, does a great job. After every meeting, there's a summary of all the actions that were taken at council that's posted on our website in very short order, usually within a day or two following the meeting. So you can find that there. It's usually under, it's a news item on the front of the homepage.
A couple of questions that just come in in the last couple of minutes. What is the best way for attorneys to submit ideas or activities to the bar? I know that court-appointed attorneys are in high demand. Would it be possible to see if the bar would provide benefits and court-appointed attorneys and things like that? So I think the idea is, how do you make suggestions to the bar for things that Bar Council might want to discuss and take on?
Yeah, I go back to what I was mentioning earlier. If I'm assuming they're talking about court-appointed in criminal matters, I'd probably talk to the criminal law section. They're very engaged. They're very active. They would have a good balance of prosecutors and criminal defense lawyers who would be probably best to make a cohesive kind of recommendation to council, and then it's a matter of just getting it on the agenda. Of course, it depends on what is it that the proposal would do. Is it a rule change? Is it just advocating for something? Is it communicating to the broader bar? But the section is a really good place to start.
Great. And then I think our final question is whether or not there are virtual options for volunteer service with the State Bar.
Yeah, I guess that depends. Perfect lawyer answer. Sections may allow everything to be virtual if you want to join a section. The council, for example, the feedback we get routinely is that they prefer to have meetings in person. Of course, that's only 3 meetings a year, so it's not, again, it's not too overwhelming. We have been engaging in more and more virtual activity. We are limited with how much we can do under the law. It's the Freedom of Information Act law, Virginia Code 2.2, 3700, I believe. They've broadened it a bit, but we can't have successive meetings virtually for the VSB council, executive committee, and the boards and committees. Sections can, though. So that's where it just depends on what you're interested in, how much you can participate in virtually.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Cameron. I think that wraps up all of our questions for today. I want to thank you and everyone who has participated and submitted questions. And we will have another Lunch and Learn mid-April. That one is going to tackle the annual meeting, and we actually have an interview lined up with a long-term attendee of the annual meeting who has attended, I believe, 47 annual meetings without missing one except for in 2020, I believe. So he had some great stories and some great feedback. So keep an eye out for the April edition of the VSB e-news. That'll be coming to your email address of record. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you all again for participating today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
All right,
Take care.
thanks.